Hi guys. I don't know about you, but in my parts here in Nova Scotia, the days are getting shorter and it's getting cool out and the trees are all turning beautiful colors and fall is here. And I like fall. It's my favorite time of year and I could paint fall all year long. I came up with this adorable little Witchy Fox, and I'm going to show you how to paint it on paper, but you could translate this design to just about anything. You can do it on wood, you could do it on a t-shirt with fabric paints or tin or whatever you like. My name is Sheila Landry, and welcome to Art Asylum. I'm going to start by showing you the supplies that I used for my sample. As I said in the opening, I used mixed media paper. I like mixed media paper because it accepts wet and dry mediums, and it's very smooth. It's kind of nice. It's really nice for acrylic paints. It does a perfect job for it. And one of the best parts is it goes through my printer. So I just printed out my design. I made it a little bit lighter in grayscale and printed it out, and it's ready to go. I didn't have to transfer my design. I do have a video that I'm going to link up in the corner there that shows many different ways that you can transfer your design onto your surfaces, no matter what surface you're using. So if you want to check that out, you can. I won't go over everything here with that. And I just wanted to make a note to you guys that I do have a project sheet available in my Ko-fi store, which is about 6 or 7 pages of basic instructions for the fox. And I'm using my DecoArt acrylic paints, DecoArt Americanas, but you could use just about any paint you want, or you could use even pastels or pencils. We're going to be finishing up with some of the details, the fine details that are hard for some people to do. I'm going to show you how you can do them with colored pencils, so you don't have to have as steady of a hand. And in my project sheets, there's basic instructions. There's a couple of photos. So they're kind of standalone. You could do the project without watching the video, but they're nice to have if you want a reference. And I think one of the most valuable things that I do put in my project sheets are these spot charts. And what they are little color spots that are similar to the colors of paint that I'm using, and that way you can just take these spot charts and match them up to your paints or pencils or pastel pencils or ink or whatever you're going to use, and that makes it really easy to get similar results. And since we're doing cartoons here, I want to stress that it's not important to match exactly. If you have something that's close in the shades that I'm talking about, you'll be fine. And I'm going to show you for the pencils that I used. I'm probably not going to use them all. In fact, I know I'm not, but I pulled similar colors from my Prismacolor pencils. Now, I also have polychromos and a couple other brands, but I'm just going to show you guys with Prismas because that's a real popular brand. And how I would do this, we're gonna start with saffron yellow. I'll just give you an example. This is saffron yellow, and that's the color on the chart. And I have swatched mine out, and I put all my pencils on these little I laminated the cards because, as we know, any of us who have pencils, the color of the pencil, you can't always see until you swatch it out. So what I did is I took my paint, or you could go by the swatch sheet that I gave you, and just get something close. Like you could see these two colors in Prisma, Sunburst and Spanish Orange, are both very similar to saffron yellow. So either one would do, which is the point that I wanted to make. So I just pulled my saffron yellow, my orange, this is called Spanish orange, excuse me, and that's the one I decided to use in place of the paint when I'm doing details or highlighting or shading, and you'll see that later as I'm actually using it. But I thought this, you know, if you saw my method, how I match colors, then it would make it easier for you. For instance, the reds that I picked here, I picked permanent red for my red, which is true red in Deco Art. And they're all very similar. So it makes it really easy, and it doesn't matter what brand of pencils you have then. You can have any brand of paint, any brand of pencils, and you'll get the basic idea for the colors. Okay, besides that, I use my regular brushes. I have my wet palette here all set up for us to begin. And I also have a video on wet palettes if you're not familiar with them. And the link will be up in the corner there. And that's about it. We're just about ready to get started. So why don't we do that, and we'll start painting our cute Witchy Fox. Okay, we're all set to get started. Now, in my project sheet, I mentioned about base coating like his chest and areas like that, the inside of his ears and that, with white. But we don't really have to do that on paper because the paper's already white, so we're not going to need to do that. Hold on, I need to get a paper towel by my palette. But I like to usually, when I base coat, start with the lighter colors and then go to the darker colors. Because that way, if you make a little boo-boo or go over a line, you can fill it out with the next color and it should be fine. So I am going to start with the gray, slate gray. And what I'm going to do, I'll try to move my palette in a little bit. I have my little clean water sitting on my wet palette, and I have a larger water that I rinse my brushes in off to the side. So I use 2 waters because I want to keep this small water cleaner for when I do float shading or use water to thin the paint. So I'm going to wet a medium round brush. This is a size 3. And kind of pick up a little paint. I keep a paper towel here too, because then I can blot on that. Just make sure it doesn't get too saturated and get through to your surface if you're like me. I'm going to try to stay in this confined area so that you guys can see a little better. And what I'm going to do to begin is to wash his chest in these areas with a little bit of gray paint. And the reason I'm doing that is, you can see I'm just kind of wetting and putting a little bit of color on it. Even though his chest is white, those gray undertones are going to give it some depth. And then when we put white fur on him, it's going to show up a little better. So we don't want to have too much color on there, but notice I'm using more paint to one side, to the edges, and keeping the middle a little bit brighter. And I'm going to do this with the inner ears, his chest. You can dampen the area first and then tip it in the paint just a little bit and kind of let it flow. A lot of times I'll draw the line on the area I want it the darkest, and then I'll just pull the paint over. It's sort of how I paint with watercolors, and it gives that nice, gentle, soft, washed effect. So see, this area of his ear would be darker. And I'm just going to nudge the paint around a little bit to give it It doesn't have to be too fussy. Okay, so we're going to do that. We're going to do the lower part of his face. Now I have the little dotted lines to show the division between the orange. Got to keep that out of my my paint there. So I'm going to dampen this first. I'm going to go section by section. So even if the colors are the same when they're next to each other, there should be a little bit of differentiation on it. And by moistening the paper or your wood piece first, it keeps the paint a little bit wet so that you can move it and blend it right away. It gives you a little more time with it. Okay, so his face is done. Let's see what else. We're going to go down and we're going to do kind of the same to his legs, just to give a division for where his legs are. So I'm going to go to this area first. I am going to move this over. I don't think you guys need me to see my palette that much. I'm just picking up a little bit of paint. And I'm kind of keeping it to one side and then blending it. You don't want a solid blend. I mean, you could, but then it's going to force you to shade later on. And I'm wetting this area, the foot area, and I'm kind of going over the dotted line there because that's going to be a soft blend. And as you could see, when I come in dark on that side, on the edges, I'm kind of leaving the light area in the middle, rinse my brush, and blend that paint. Okay? So see how each leg, even though we're using the same color of gray, you could still see the division of the legs. Now you could do the middle next, or a lot of times what I do is skip around, because then by the time we go back to do the middle, this area will be dry. So I'm putting water. You don't want it floating too much. If you have too much water on there, blot your brush and kind of pick up that excess paint. Okay? If you put a lot of paint like that, just rinse your brush and scooch it along. What we're doing is kind of nudging the paint to where we want it. Okay, and I'll skip this area under his belly there. And same thing here. I'm just going to wet this area. Kind of pick up that paint. And encourage it. Okay? I'm going to skip over and do the tip of his tail the same way. Make sure I'm still in the middle. And same thing, we're going to concentrate on the edges. And you could turn your piece. Now, I'm going to try to keep it out of my paint, yet in the frame, so you'll be watching me turn the piece. And I've really liked base coating like this. It's really made it easier, and it's less stress, and I used to base coat by like solidly blocking in with the color like gray. We're on the gray now, the slate gray. And then you have to both highlight and shade it, and it makes it the process a lot harder, I find. I think this is a faster and easier way to do things, and it takes a lot of the work out of it, because I'm going to go back on the leg and add a little more, just a little. It's not going to matter because most of this is going to be covered. So just so there's like a light hint of gray here, because as you see, like the center of the paws are a little bit gray. We're going to go over with, I believe this color is soft black, but it's going to be so much easier than having to float shade in these little tiny areas and highlight little areas, yet it gives a nice sense of depth to everything. So as I'm looking at my sample, I want it a little bit darker under his chin, just to start off. So I'm going to put one more line under his chin because that's where the shadow is. And if you don't get this perfect, it's not going to matter, because when you come back with your shade color, when you're filling in that fur, you'll be able to add more or less as needed in the colors you need. Okay, we also want to do the top of his hat in the gray, because the top of his hat is going to be Payne's gray, but it has that glowy base of a lighter gray with it. So we're going to do that. And notice when we're doing this hat brim that the front edge, we're going to kind of leave that alone, because that's the brightest part right here. So I'm going to do that with you. And I'm going to do it the same way. Just going to basically wash it. I guess we'll call this a wash. I'm going to go a little darker near the buckle and the hat band and the edges, because those are going to be the darkest parts. And then just kind of scribble it in. And it doesn't even have to be even. It honestly looks a little better when it's not even, because it's not so blocky looking. And as I said, you know, you'll be able to pick up your highlights easier. Okay, and now the brim. And for the brim, I will wet it first. And what wetting it first also accomplishes is the paint will, when you allow the paint to flow on your paper or wood or whatever, it's going to confine it. It usually stays within the confines easier. So you don't have to paint as straight or as fussy. And you're not going to get a full highlight there right now, but we'll come back and do that with some white. You just want to kind of avoid it. So I'm just going on that top edge here. And pulling it down. So see how it fades? It's as if you already float shaded it. I'll bring it closer. So it's darker on the top and it's lighter there. And his nose also needs, I think I did the nose in Payne's, so we'll do that next. Okay. The next color I'm going to use is a spiced pumpkin, which is like a medium rusty orange. And that's going to be the orangey tones in our fox. And it's also going to be the bases for the pumpkins. So we're going to do all the pumpkins with that. And the bottom of the ears. And the top of his head, his back, his legs, and his tail. So I will probably paint and just put on music and let you watch me a little bit quicker. So we'll do that. I want to show you like this little area here. What I want to do is kind of bleed the line out a little bit. Just show a little hint of that orangey color there. So right now he's naked, he doesn't have any fur on. And I'm gonna paint a line, and then with a damp brush, maybe just kind of wash it a little bit over the line, if you could see that. Okay, so that's our fox, and I'll go ahead and do the pumpkins in the same manner so you could see them being done. Okay, you could see all the spice pumpkin color is done, and you could check your areas and make sure that your paint is how you want it. You could see I put a little more color on the outside edges to give it some shape. Right now we're not really worried about this. This is only like a base coat, but what it does is it gives you a good foundation for adding your shades and your highlights on, and it makes it really easy to make something that's really nice and dimensional. So the next color I'm going to use is the Payne's Gray, and I'm going to paint the nose and underside of the hat with that. And we want this a little bit darker in the front edge. And I'm going to do this the same way. This is a pretty dark color, so you want to go cautious with it. Again, you might want to wet your surface a little first, see how it makes the paint move a little easier on it. And you're going to just keep putting light washes on. We're going to do a lot of layers in order to make this look dimensional. Oops, just got paint up there. And while we don't have to be real fussy about it, you want it kind of neat. You know, this is a dark area under his hat, so we're going to add a little more color there. I'm also going to shade a little more on the bottom edge and by his face. So this side of the hat is kind of like a triangle of the darker area. This area by his head. And then before that dries, you kind of want to blend it in. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you want it, you know, you don't want a big line there. You want it to gradually fade. And you could see how that gives dimension to that area under the hat there. Same on this side. We're going to repeat this process. Just making sure I'm in frame. So I'm dampening that first so I don't get any harsh lines. Now you can see how the paint moves. I have a little much water on it. So I'm not going to panic. I blotted my brush and I'm picking it up, the excess. And then I could put some more on. And start to move that around. And blend it. And now, because this is acrylic paint that I'm using, it will not reconstitute. So these layers that we're putting down in the beginning are going to stay put. They're not going to lift or mix in with the layers that we're putting on top. So that's a good thing, but it's something you need to consider. If you're using something like watercolor, you want to probably be a little careful and use a little bit of a different process, because that watercolor will reconstitute as you wet it for the layers later on, unless you're going to use colored pencil over it, and then it should be no problem at all. Okay, so there is the bottom of his hat. Let's see what I got here. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at my notes here. Okay, the next color we're going to do is traditional burnt sienna, which is like a reddish brown. And I'm going to do the pumpkin stems and the hat band with that. And these, we don't have to be very fussy. Again, we're going to wind up doing the shading on these with the colored pencils because they're small. So do a little out there. Okay, we'll do his hat band. Here, I'll bring that in the middle. And we're doing this the same way with light washes, because you're going to be able to shade either with pencils or paint a little later on. And this way you're preserving some of the highlights. If we did this all one solid color, it would be a lot more work to shade and highlight it. And we want to do his eyes too in this traditional burnt sienna. Just to give him a base coat. We're going to put black pupils later and allow just a little bit of this burnt sienna to show through to make the iris color. So there's a little variance. They're not just going to be black spots for his eyes, but it's a lot easier that way. And I did skip over doing his nose with the Payne's Gray. So I want to go over his nose with the Payne's Gray. And I like to use a color other than black when I'm doing like a black nose, even though it'll look mostly black, because the Payne's has a little bit of blue in it, and it'll give it a more deep and rich tone. And again, you could see I'm leaving the top of the nose a little bit lighter so that the natural highlight is there. The next thing we're going to do is use the saffron yellow and grab a little of that, and we're going to paint the base on the buckle. This is pretty easy to do. Just like that. Just a nice little buckle. And I noticed that I painted a little orange on the tip of this ear, and that's going to be tipped in white, which this won't really matter, but just to make things politically correct, I'm going to correct my mistake and put a little bit of white there. So he's fine. Okay. So the next step that I'm going to do is to float shade his hat over the gray area, the top of his hat, with Payne's Gray. And this was based, I put a wash of slate gray on it, which is a medium gray. And this time we're going to deepen everything. And for this step, I'm going to use my angle shader. I like to use an angle shader to float shade. A lot of people use flat shaders. Of course, you can use colored pencils for this on. I'm going to have videos later where I'm going to show you where I only get the painting to this stage where everything is kind of washed and based out. And then what I do is finish it off with colored pencils, and you'll be able to see that they look equally nice. So it's a nice way to choose how you want to finish it off. So I'm going to take, when I float shade with the shader, I'm going to bring in my palette here so you can see, and try not to get on my piece here. I have a clean paper towel here. I'm going to have to move that up. There you go. And I like an angle shader because when you float shade, you want paint on the tip of your brush. I'm going to see if I can get a better paint on the tip, and it's going to fade to water. So the paint's going to wick pretty much like we did here. There's paint on this edge and it fades out. But we're doing it with a brush. So what we want to do is use a wet brush. I dipped it in my clean water and I touch it on the paper towel. And I'm picking up just a little bit of paint, and you can see by the blend on your palette that there's paint on one side of the brush. That's the toe, and the heel there isn't. And that's exactly how we want it. We don't want these little droplets to get in. So what I'm going to do, I go back and forth, and I tap when I feel I have too much water. I'll tap on my paper towel, but I don't scrub it in, because if I start rubbing on my paper towel, I'm going to blend that paint to the end of the brush, which I don't want to do, especially when I'm using a small brush. And now I got to get this out of the way. I'm trying to show you close, but show you everything. So in order to do, I'm going to start on the top edge. I want the bottom edge to remain lighter, like here. See how the bottom edge of the brim is lighter and the top is more intense color. And when you're floating in a thin area like that, how I do it is I start on the chisel edge, which means my edge is going in the same direction that I'm floating. This is a chisel edge. This is a perpendicular edge if I turn the brush that way. And since this is a thin area, I'm going to start here, follow that upper line, and as I work the paint across, I'm going to start to turn it ever so slightly, as much as I can without getting it on the other area. Now see how nice that float came out, because I started in this direction, and as I painted I slowly turned it. And the reason you want to keep the brush clean is, if you see, when you paint perpendicular to the line, the heel end of your brush will be on the orange part of the fox, and you don't want paint there, so you have to keep it off. And even when you're stroking in this direction, I'm not letting the heel rest on the paint, because it would contaminate the back end of the brush. So you start in there, and you could go over, see how I'm doing a darker layer, and you're kind of blending as you go. Especially small areas like this, I don't do just one swipe. You do a couple of little choppy strokes like this. And you could see in the wide area the difference. Now that looks quite extreme. It goes from, you know, a highlight to blown out highlight. So what I want to do, get some more paint, and you're going to make it wider. You're going to pull it out. And you kind of blend it down. If you want a little more color, you just go again as many times as it takes. And it's good if you want to skip around. That's what I do a lot in these small areas too, is you skip from area to area so you're not pulling off the paint that you just put on. I'm painting on paper, so it's absorbent, so it dries a lot faster than wood. If you're on wood or a sealed surface that's hard like tin or wood, you want to wait and let the paint dry, because it is acrylic paint. It should dry and it should stay put. So you want that paint dry in the first layer, and then you're able to come back, and you have a lot of control here as to how much color you want to add. I still want to leave that edge light, because that is a highlight in there, but you want this to blend evenly so it looks like it's cohesive, even though you're doing lots of little strokes. So, see how nice that looks? It's a nice even float shade. There's a highlight on his brim. We're going to be shading under here. I'm going to show you on the sample. I left that nice highlight. Even though we went darker shading again, it looks really nice. And it gives it depth and shape. So I'm going to continue doing the hat like this with the brush, and you could just watch me while I do that. And see, when I'm in the tip of the hat, I'm kind of just using the tip of my angle brush. This is why I like angle brushes as opposed to using flats for float shading, because it allows me to manipulate the paint a lot easier. Now, instead of going right here next, this paint is still pretty wet. What I'm going to do is come across and then maybe go around, and by the time I get to that side, it should be dry and not pull off. Once the perimeter of this area the hat is dry, then we could add the folds in. And I'm just going by the these little bumps I drew in. And what I'm doing on the folds is pulling the floats towards the center and kind of tapering them off. So we don't want them like stripes really, but we're kind of filling in that area, and it's going to give it a look of being folded, a folded fabric. So go from one side or the other. You could kind of fill in some color with some, this is still with the Payne's Gray now. And the hat looks kind of old, so it doesn't have to be perfect. And remember to preserve some of the highlights. I mean, you could go over it again, but we're going to go over this again probably with black, so we want some of this paints to show through. It gives it a little deeper color. You could go over some areas like under the hat here and by the band where you know it's a darker shade because of shadow from the hat band and because it's a folded area. And that looks pretty good. So we're going to leave the hat like that for now. And the next step will be to shade Mr. Fox with soft black. We're going to add the darker shades into him right now. I'll start at the ears. I'm using the same brush and the same technique. Now you see there's quite a bit of paint, but no panic. We're going to take some water and just blend it to the bottom of the ears. Same thing on this ear. I'm going to turn my piece. And the blend could go over where the white meets the orange because that's how a shadow would be. These are the shadows we're putting in him. So no worries there. We're going to be painting fur on him. So you want shadow around his hat. And I'm going to do shadow, a little line up the middle of his ear. This will all have fur layers over it too, like I said, so it may look weird now, and I'm just going to curve that kind of, and not bring it all the way to the point. I want it to kind of taper. And I turn this over because these shadows go toward the bottom. And I'm right-handed, so I have to keep flipping my piece. So I shaded his head, his ears. Next will be the head and the face. This is a scary one, but you can do it. Start up at his eye and kind of bring it around down to his cheek. This is the shade from his nose coming over. Okay, and we're not going to go up the other side of his nose because the light's going to come in from there, but we are going to shade from his under his hat here. Now you can wet this first a little bit, dampen it. Watch when you go back across this line that it's not still wet. So see how I shaded, because this is his face. The next step down will be around his little white chest here. So I'm going to start up here. Bring that shade around. And again, this is a longer area that we're floating, but we don't have to do it all in one stroke. When you start at this tiny edge here, what I would do is go on your chisel edge. Too much water. And just kind of bring a light shade under there. We're going to have fur there, so it's going to be fine. So chisel edge, come around, and kind of meet up where you are. And that's kind of a fuzzy area there, because we're going to fill that all in with fur. So we're going to continue around his legs like this. I guess I'll do in between here first, because then this will dry by the time we get back over. I'm going to do the left side of his tail. And I'm going to kind of taper this float. This is soft black still, so it's a very, very dark brown. And as we get to the top of his tail, we're going to taper it, because that part of his tail is going to be white. I'm going to leave that and skip back over to his legs. And I'm going to do the left side first. And his feet. I'm not going to do the right side at this point because I would pull that paint off. So I'm going to start at the next leg, his front leg. Bring this all the way up to his chest. His chest should be dry. Don't forget, this is the under layers. The fur is going to go over this, so no worries. This is his belly. This area is almost all dark, so we're going to give a really nice, strong float there. Still leaving it fade. Up his other front paw. skip to the other side of his underbelly, which is dark, and up to define his elbow. I want this area really dark. And then his other leg. Okay. Now, I'm going to flip him over, and we're going to go this way. Of course, if you're left-handed, you'll do this opposite. So this should be dry. You want that shadow from the pumpkin. Up the side of his tail, and as I get to the top, I'm going to thin out my line. You can blend this as much as you want. This should be dry. And this is that other little area underneath his, like his belly. It's in the shadows, in between his legs. So that's going to be pretty dark. So I'm kind of just washing it in. His other front arm, you want to leave that white in the front a little bit for highlights. Though you could still go pretty dark with this, because his front paws are kind of black. We're going to adjust the colors later and with the colored pencils. So this is still kind of like basing. It's a lot of lines here. The other side of his underbelly. And see, even though that's dark, we're getting a nice variance of value, which is the light and the darks. And here we're coming from his chest, is shadowing. Looks kind of messy now, but it will come together. This will make him look quite handsome, actually. And one more leg. Let's see. And I'm going to turn my brush. Okay, so this leg looks light. I'm going to go back over that. Let's see my sample. Yeah, so he's got some white fur and a little black foot there. So that'll look nice. Blackish. Right? Okay, and since this is lower in with the pumpkins, I want to put a little more shading there. You have to kind of look at your pieces and assess, you know, where your shadows are, where your lights are. So that's his first basic shade. And I'll be right back. I'm gonna let this dry for a second, make sure that everything's pretty dry. All right, he's pretty dry now. And the next thing I am gonna do, after switching my glasses, there we go, now I can see, is we're gonna do the first layer of fur on him. And I'm gonna start with his ears because it's an easy part, plus it's an inobtrusive part, so it's not like a focal point. So if it doesn't come out exactly, you know, how you like it while you're getting your footing, it'll be fine. And to do the ears, I'm gonna thin my paint to kind of an inkier consistency, as you see here, with a little water. Now I'm not using mediums in this project because, for one, I don't always like how when you use a lot of medium in acrylic paint to thin the paint, it sometimes adds a shine to it, so that kind of gets to be annoying. You could tell what you thinned and what you didn't. And I feel like as long as the paint is still sticking to everything, even if it's a thin wash, it'll be fine. So I'm going to start with the traditional burnt sienna and just show you how we're going to do a few strokes, so to get you going. And I'm going to kind of probably speed up a lot of this process with some music, but I want to get you started. So I have some water on my brush. This is a rigger brush. This is a 10-0 by, it's a Dynasty False Squirrel, but any longer liner brush will do. This has a little bit longer filaments, bristles, which means it'll hold a little bit more paint, yet it's thin. So you're going to get nice fur with this. And you're going to load the brush, and we're going to start just pulling out fur. And since this is the darkest area, that's probably a good place to get going on it. Now you don't need a whole lot of fur on this. You could really do this with a pencil if you feel like doing it with paint is too tedious. I like doing it with paint myself, and I do several layers. I'm adding some of the Spice Pumpkin, which was that base color, on my palette, because when I do fur, I mix in the colors and I do several colors at once. So I'll load up and do, as I showed you, the burnt sienna, which was a little darker, and then you could switch and go back to the base color. This way you have a lot of control, and you can really easily tone the painting however you like. If you see on my sample, I did the black tipping on the ears and inside the ear. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to switch to black, and I'm going to pull out just a few strokes over that line on the edge, on the 2/3, I guess, top of the edge. Please don't measure, just do it. So I did that with the black, and I also want to pull out, since the inside of the ears have a little bit of black, where I put that float line. I'm going to kind of go over and pull it to the bottom side of that line, because this is supposed to be like a fold in his ear. So just a few. See, less is more. And then I'm going to switch. I rinsed my brush off camera, and I'm loading up some thinned white paint, and I'm going to fill in some of the ears, covering this line with some white. Now you won't see the white as much, obviously, because I'm on white paper, but if you were doing this on tan paper or something, you'd see it more. You're going over the ends of that black a little bit. We're not going to get too fussy. I'm going to try to explain, but I don't want to get too fussy with it here. So So just a layer to kind of cover that line. You may cover up your black a little bit, but that's fine. You could go back, you rinse your brush, pick up the black, and then just add a few strokes. One thing I do want to mention when stroking fur, you don't want to go all in one direction. Like if you keep going in the same exact direction with parallel strokes, it's going to look very fake. I call that soldier fur because all the little strokes are lined up like soldiers. So you want to kind of skew it left and right a little bit and make it look a little messy, so to speak. So see how that ear filled in nicely? If you feel like you want a little more orange in there, if you lost your orange with your colors over it, your base colors, and you want more of a tone, you can add that medium orange into there in the areas that you want. You can darken this a little bit close to his hat, because this is switching back to the traditional burnt sienna. I gotta pick up enough. There we go. So see, you could go back and forth, because if you look at animals, you could even throw a couple colors in here just to give it something different. Because when you look at an animal, even an animal that's one color, there's always a few different colors of hairs in there. So see how that made his one ear come to life? We're going to do the same with the other. I'm going to start with the traditional burnt sienna and do a few here just to get an under layer. Switch to the black. And for the black, remember, we're going to kind of define the edge. So I'm going to walk it up here. Just a few. We're not going to cover that whole line, but you won't notice it. I hope you could see that. And a little bit over the top, less by the base and more at the tip, because we want him to have kind of black tipped ears like foxes have. And then we're going to pull some black hairs towards the bottom again, because this is the fold side right there, and pull that out and kind of fill it in. Then we're going to go back to our traditional burnt sienna, which is the medium dark reddish brown, and do a layer there. Put some more white in there to highlight, and our highlights are on this side of the line, so that's where we're going to put most of the white. And see, you could bleed them over to the black area. That'll make it look more natural. And see, this area right here looks a little light, so I'm going to go back to my spiced pumpkin base coat. Get the drop off so it doesn't wreck it, and pull out a couple of little hairs from that. If it looks bright, which it does, we're going to go over it with the traditional burnt sienna. So see how I'm doing this back and forth, but see how controlled it is. That's the nice part of doing this. Is why I don't use any like comb brushes or that when I do animals, because the comb brushes go all in one direction, which, as I said, is not natural, and that's not how animal fur happens. So now both his ears are done for now, and we're going to move to the head, and I will do that the same manner and let you just kind of watch how I'm going to do it. I'm going to turn them upside down. When you do fur, you want to do the furthest part first because the layers will be on top of it as they're closer to you. So for me, I'm turning this upside down. I'm going to do near his hat first and work towards his nose and chin. And that means because it's under his hat, we're going to go the darker fur. We're going to use our traditional burnt sienna first because it's the darker of the brown colors. And I'm going to pull a little bit of shadow on the bridge of his nose. Make sure you have enough water that it moves. And kind of fill it in, not solidly. You want to let some of the fur bleed over the hat area. As I said, we're going to shade the hat again, so we'll be doing more final layers of fur over that. And for this color, I'm going to bring it on this side of the bridge of his nose. And I don't like, see how that's like a line right there. So I don't want that to be such a straight line. I'm going to pull some little pieces of fur. And all of us have had pets. Just follow the direction of the fur. It goes back up around, up to the forehead, behind the eye, and across the face sideways. So kind of work your strokes into that pattern, and you'll be doing good. Same on the other side. I'm going to flip it for that, and I'm going to pull this around, kind of following the shape of his eye and his muzzle. Okay. So now I'm going to switch to white. And what I am going to do is, again, go in the shape of the muzzle, but this time I'm going to kind of go up above that little dotted line on your pattern and fill that in a bit. And this is why we put the gray undertones for it, is so this white will show up. You could see it kind of covers that line. By the time we're done, we'll have that covered. Same at the bridge of his nose. We're going to work this fur up into the red fur we just painted on. And then, now this is in the shadows, so you don't want to go all the way to his nose maybe, but you want to pull a few little strokes like this of white. What I'll do next, and remember this is the first layer, is I'm going to load my brush, my lining brush, with black paint, and I'm going to paint his eyes, the pupils, following the shape. And I'm going to leave that little tiny bit of the rusty traditional burnt sienna showing. So he has like a little iris. And I want to draw this line to divide the back end of his face. I also want to line his eye right now. So this is going to clean it up. You could also use a waterproof marker for these lines if they're hard for you to do with paint. I understand that it's not always easy, because when I'm on camera, it isn't, to line his eyes. Okay, so I had a little tiny boo-boo there, and what I'm gonna do is just load up some white paint, make sure that's dry, and you could clean it up. There you go. And while I'm at it, I will put his highlights in. While I'm doing this part, I might as well do his nose. And for that, I'm going to kind of just use black paint, lamp black, line on the top of his nose. Come down these sides. And I'm going to just, I rinsed my brush. It has a little bit of water on it. I'm just making sure you can see. And I'm going to just kind of wash color in. You could pick up a little more black if you want, but just so it's not like a fully solid. So it has a little bit, see that highlight I'm pulling out because I'm moving it around, and it'll make it look a little more natural. And I am gonna also just paint in his mouth. There will be fur over this, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but we can get that in it right now, and it looks pretty good. See how he comes to life? So I am gonna just probably paint with some music, and I'm gonna go around and do the different areas, and I'll stop and let you know when I have things to say. I'll talk about them as I get to them, but then you won't have to watch this in real time. Before I go into speed mode, where I speed things up, what I wanted to explain to you is I'm going to be doing the fox, and I'm going to do it in quicker motion time, whatever. And I want to just explain, I'm going to use a little bit bigger brush. This is a round brush. This was a brush I used for the face, and you could see the difference. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want my fur to be softer and a little bit bigger. The face was a little bit tedious, or, you know, detailed. It's a smaller area, but I think we'll get more mileage out of a bigger brush. And what I'm going to do, just so I'm mapping out so you could watch me do things, I'm going to do the darker area first, under his legs and feet, and in his tail, and even under here, with the black, or the soft black. Maybe I'll do the soft black, and then if I want some really, you know, detail lines, some more contrast, I could add black later, because soft black is like a step down. And this type of stuff, this is why I always say you don't need the exact color, is because you could improvise to your own tastes. what makes this guy look attractive is there's a great deal of contrast. Even on the halo around his tail, it's dark and light. You need the dark there first in order to add the light strokes over. Same with under his head, because his head is shaded. You can see on my sample, his face still looks very, confined here. There's hardly any fur. And what we're going to do is extend this too and kind of blend it into the shading. I'm going to reshade the hat after we're done adding some fur. And that'll kind of melt these areas into each other so they won't be so predominant. Just like when you're looking at somebody who's wearing a hat, their hair tends to fade underneath the hat. Same with these areas here. This is all very dark under here, but I still wanted a little bit of differentiation, and you could still see that this is two front paws, his belly and his back paws. So keep that in mind while you're watching me. I'm going to do these dark areas first, and I may even, go up and around here, but this is going to get softened out with the subsequent lighter layers. We're going to start the back areas first, because when you put fur on, if I started here, you'd want the lighter areas up on top. It's easier to start in here and work your way out. You could always go backwards. You go back and forth a lot. So I hope that doesn't sound wishy-washy, but it's really the way you do it. That's why it's sometimes hard to teach realism for me, because it's a lot of light layers going back and forth. And actually, the more layers you put in, the more realistic it looks. So the key for me is to build on light layers, and you could easily tone them one way or the other when you're done. Okay, so with that said, we'll get going on painting him. I'm painting his fur layers. I'm using soft black here, pulling some strokes. Since his paws are going to be idealistically black, I am going to pull a couple strokes over these little dotted line areas. And note I'm going over the lines. I'm kind of going to cover the lines. I wanted to note, even though his chest is white, he still has a lot of brown in it. Same with his tail and this little area on his knee. There's some white fur here, but for the majority, his leg and foot is dark. So we want to keep that. Now I changed my color to the traditional burnt sienna, and I'm going to do the darker orange or rusty parts. Same way. I did want to say, if you notice when I go over the face again, I'm kind of toning it. You're seeing the colors underneath, but it's kind of bringing them together a little bit. And as I did in the first part, you skew the fur into different directions a little bit, slightly to left or right. And see how I'm bringing that down just a touch into the lighter area, maybe just a hair or two. And I'm pulling it out onto the hat. Even though we're going to shade the hat, it's fine to have these little fur pieces here, or hairs there, I guess you'd call it. And I notice his nose looks pale now, so I'm going to put just a touch, do a layer of the spiced pumpkin, which is the medium orange, and I'm going to tone this. But I'm going to do it by pulling fur. So you see how this is filling in. And you can see how much control you have on the colors. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. One thing I'd like to point out too is when trying to go over a line that's really distinct like this, sometimes it's better to break it up with white first, or the light color, in this instance white. So what I'm gonna do is kind of go over it with white, and you see how it kind of disappears. And I'm gonna do the same over on this side with the dark, because this side has a dark area because it's kind of behind his shoulder, and that's the front side. So you might want to load your paint up with some white, because if you put the white down and it looks dark, you could easily go over it with whatever color you're painting the fur in, and it'll give you an instant layer. Same on the tail. There's that little dotted line that I can still see through. And what I'm gonna do is just go over it with fur. And as I'm doing the black lines, I'm going to kind of trace roughly around his feet. Remember, there's fur there, so you can bring some fur down here. You could do his little toes like that, just to accentuate that dark. And then this is almost all black. You want these inside areas to be darker than the front paws. Yet you still want to leave little bits of light in between so you can see what they are actually. What I'm doing here is I'm adding a little bit of the Payne's Gray as a wash on the tip of his tail. And you could do a little of that on his chest too if you like, because then the white fur will show up better. You don't want that too dark. So we're going back and forth between washes and fur, pretty much. And this is supposed to be uneven. It's not going to be even. I'm just trying to get a little bit without getting too much on there. And anything here that we're not happy with, we can correct also with colored pencils, don't forget. Because I'm going to still do some detailing with pencils at the end and show you how to do that. Okay, so see how that's a little darker. I want this a little darker. Just these inside areas. He looks very shaggy now, but we're going to straighten him up. We're going to neaten him up later at the end when we do the details. So now I'm going back to white. And I'm filling in the white fur areas, leaving the other colors showing. You could pull a white in the highlight areas a little bit, like here on the leg. I have a lot of white on my sample. It's going to vary from, if you did this 3 times, each of your 3 would probably look different. So you don't have to get them perfect by any means. I want to do a little cleanup there. Now see how soft the white shows up on the gray that we just painted. We want to still leave that dark, keep that side darker. But we want to kind of blend these layers. With each layer you put, it looks a little more natural. So there's no panic here. If you get some chunky strokes in here, just kind of skim over it. I'm using a very light touch and slightly thinned white paint. And this is on a small round brush. I would say about a size 2. This one says 1. It's a size 1, but you know, as we know, each company, it differs a little. But you'll get a feel for it. Pick your favorite brush. And now if you get too light again, where it looks too even, you could always go back to a darker color and throw a couple hairs in to break it up. All it takes is a couple strokes. So you just gently work the design. Now I'm going to work a little more on his feet and legs. I feel like this area looks messy. So what I'm going to do is really add another dark wash on his belly areas, which are the 3 in between his legs. Well, the 2 and then his back leg where it meets the front leg. Because this is kind of too even here. And I am going to take, that was done in the lamp black, and I'm going to take the soft black, which is a dark brown, and I'm going to just add a couple more strokes in there. darken and then shade where this is his foot here. I'm going to shade the bottom and I'm going to shade it here. And I don't like that area right now, so I'm going to take some of the traditional burnt sienna and add that in, put a little color back in, and also the spiced pumpkin it is. So you can go back and forth like this and fine-tune your design. As you see, this is just like a watery brush, and you can see it's toning. It's giving little reflected light. Okay, so I'm gonna let this dry and then we'll move on. That's his basic fur is done. All right, before we move on, I want to shade his hat with the lamp black and deepen those shades so we can finish up the fur, the base fur on his head, because as you can see, his head looks quite small and it kind of just too little for the rest of his body, because now he's fluffed out a little bit. So we're going to do that with our angle shader. Let me pull that out again, and lamp black paint in the same way we did previously. And this is going to be a heavier float because I want it nice and dark under there. And the first line I'm going to float is going to go all the way over his face. So we're going to be brave for this because his eye and his head is really truly under a shadow. So it would look stupid if we did not shade that part. So I'm going to get the paint on my brush. Let me get it right. There we go. And we'll begin the same way. We're going to start in the corner, not too much water, and short choppy strokes. And you could see the paint is pretty much fading to nothing. So I could go over this fox and see I'm getting shade there and I'm still seeing the orange. That's why I like to start here. You get your bearings so you can kind of get a feel for it, so by the time you get into the important part, and when I start again, I'm starting back here. So I could drag it up, control it, and go right over his eye and see how his eye shows through. And bring it to, is it going to make it? I might have to put a little more paint. Bring it to the end. And then shade it in. And you could see he's shaded underneath. That part looks a little bit further away from us, and this eye looks closer to us because of the shade we just did. So I'm going to turn the piece this way, get some more paint, and we're going to come back. And since I almost ran out of paint there, I'll start on that side with the full load. And this time, notice how I'm turning my brush. And by the time I hit his face, I'm almost the opposite direction. So I started in this direction, I kind of turned, and I wound up in that direction. And there's a little bit there. And then I'm going to pick up here. I still have enough paint. You could reload if you need to. And I'm going to bring it back to that corner. And we're going to darken it a little. I also want to darken it here a little. I want to let that dry first though. Let's let that dry. I also want to float this top edge more, and we're going to float more on the hat. And this area here where his head meets the brim, the underside of the brim is bright, and those two areas also need to be darkened. So I'm still using black paint. I'll float this top edge first. And we're doing it the same way. We're just going over our initial shading. And this is going to give it a little more drama and contrast. So that looks good. And now, like I said, these areas, I kind of almost want to wash them down. I'm not going to call it a float, though it's kind of a float and a wash. I'll start here. And I'm going to kind of pull out the color. So it's a float, but we're kind of just washing it. And then I'll turn it over to do the other side. Same thing, I'll start in this dark area on the corner of my brush. And I'm going to wash this. And it looks like he's wearing a helmet right now, but that's okay. And my kitty Wolf Blitzer is having a fit in the background. I don't know why, nobody's here but me, but he does that. Okay. So just so those areas are darker, we're going to put more fur on there too. And then I'm going to go around the hat too, one more time, with the black this time. Last time it was with the Prussian blue, was it? No, it was with Payne's Grey. I'm sorry. And now we're going to reinforce this float with black. And again, the reason we have the Prussian blue or the Payne's under there is to give it a little bit of more color than the flat black would give. It tones it a little bit. And as you can see, this is deepening the shading a little bit. And it's going to give us more contrast. I'm kind of pulling in those areas. Again, we're going to go over this with pencils in the next step so we can fine-tune this shading. But as long as I'm here with this on my brush, I think it's a good time to reinforce this. Make it maybe a little more contrast. And as I did before, I skipped around so that I don't pull off the paint that I just put on. And it looks a little light there, so I'm just going to wash it with a little of the black. Okay, and one last thing while I got the black, before I switch over to the next part, is I want to go under his chin a little with black. Because this is quite a deep shade here. And I am going to be adding more fur, but then this layer will be nice and deep here. And you could drag this out a little to give a good shadow. Okay. Okay, I'm going to go back to my round brush. And I'm going to redo the fur on his head and drag it out towards the hat underneath. Now you're not going to see this a lot on the orange, but it's there unless you look close. So you're just taking some strokes to break up. You don't want that dark black line. We're just going to kind of blend that. It might take 2 layers. If you're not happy with one, you're just kind of breaking up that dark. It's still dark under there. You might not be able to see it much, but it does make a difference. And after doing the traditional burnt sienna, I had a look at the color. Then I'm going to go back to the white and do the lower part of the face in the same manner. So I'm going to do a layer and kind of bring it out over the hat. Bring some fur down here too to break up that line that we just put, that shade line underneath his head. See how I'm just putting a little soft edge on? I'm kind of just on the tip of the brush, pulling some little white strands of fur out. Same here. Look at your piece and kind of figure out how it's going to look natural. And don't forget that we're going to put whiskers on too. So a lot of this will be covered, but it'll be good practice. Maybe just soften his chin just ever so slightly. I'm just tapping. And if this looks too clean, I don't know what's wrong with my kitty. He's chasing his, we put his treats in a closet. And he figured out that they're up on the shelf in the closet. And that's what he's howling at, if you guys could hear him. Because he wants to have them. There you go. See, those couple of strokes made a difference. And if you see any like flat edges of fur, you know, where they don't taper, you could go over it again. If you want a little more brightness on the center of the tail while we have the white. Like I said, this is all like give and take. It's a playing thing. You know, you just go back and forth a little bit until you're happy with how things look. And they don't have to look realistic, but he's looking pretty good right now. So, for the most part, his fur is done. And we're going to move on to the pumpkins. For the pumpkins, I'm going to do most of them with pencils, because that's a really good opportunity to show you how well the pencils work on small areas. But I do have in the project sheet that I painted the division lines for each of the pumpkins using asphaltum, which is a transparent-ish medium brown. Okay, so you can use any medium brown there. And by doing that, I'm gonna float shade. Since the striations come from the middle, I'll show you on the big pumpkin. It's easiest. I'm gonna float shade towards the outside. Now that's a thick float, so I'm gonna wet it down. Kind of bring it in. And just follow that along the pumpkin. So we're going from the center outward. Same with those little ones up on top. You're just going to put like a little wash with the corner of an angled brush. This is all shadow back here. I'm hoping you can see that. Yeah, you can. Okay, and now I'm going to turn my piece over because these all go in that direction. And same thing. Starting to the left and going right because I am right-handed, and you don't want to pull off the paint that you just put on. So it makes sense to do the left floating first. Then when the next line comes, you're here and you're not in danger of getting rid of the paint that you just put on. So you could watch me do this. I'm going to do all these little pumpkins. Oops. Okay, and I'm also going to shade his little hat band with asphaltum, and I'm shading the edge that's close to the brim of the hat, the lower edge of the hat band. And I am going over the buckle too, because the shadow goes over the buckle. And looking at my hat band, I think it's a little bit light. The color got washed out, so you could either add that in with colored pencil, or you could just add another wash of color over it. That's the nice thing with layers. This is traditional burnt sienna that we used in the beginning, so I'm just adding a touch more of that. So there we are. The main shading areas are done on the pumpkin. Hold on, I missed a few up here. I'm just going to put a couple little strokes in here for shadow. A little bit at the bottom you could add. For a shadow there. I'm going to bring this out so I'm in the frame. Just put a little color on the bottom. And I noticed too, these pumpkins are kind of washed out, but that's okay. We're going to be coloring pencil over them, and we'll intensify their color a little bit. So he's looking pretty handsome. The next step will be going to our color pencils for some detailing. Alright, he's looking really good here. I'm really pleased with how he's coming out. And as I said, the pumpkins look a little washed out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this is called Mineral Orange, and it's a color similar to the spiced pumpkin that we base these pumpkins in. And I'm just going to start to add some color in. I want them a little bit oranger than they are. And I'm still going to leave the tops light, because I like that. It gives them highlights. So I'm using the pencil on its side very soft and just kind of shading in gently. A little bit of color. See the difference? And we'll go over here and do the same. And our little one. Okay. So now you see they have a little bit more color to them. And I'm going to do the highlights in, this is Spanish Orange in Prismacolors. And it's very similar to the saffron for Deco Art. And I'm going to color in these top areas. Same way. Just a little bit on its side of some nice gentle shading. You don't put a lot of pressure when you do this, because you don't want to indent the paper and have it so it doesn't accept any more layers. You could see I just used on the side and highlighted the tops of the pumpkins. Okay, that's good enough for that. And now I am going to take, this is just plain orange, which is similar to Orange Flame. If you're painting, you would be washing these colors over, just little washes to give them a little bit more oomph on their colors. And I'm going to take this orange and add yet another layer in the back. So these little back lumps or bumps of the pumpkin, I'm just doing close to the stem where the stem attaches. And then I'm going to avoid the top, and I'm going to go down into more shaded areas here. And there should be a little shadow here where the pumpkin, you know, is in front of the other one. And I'm using kind of circular motions with the pencil on its side. So only the tip is really touching. And I'm doing the same here, the bottoms of the pumpkins. And you could see when you see them the left to the right, how these look a lot more colorful and natural. And I'm going to go and do the same on the two here. And don't forget the back ones. The nice thing about pencils is if you get them out of the lines, I use this little Mono Zero eraser by Tombow. It's nice, you just click it up and it has a point or a little tiny eraser. And you could really get into the detail areas if you want. We're going to put a ground cover there later, so it doesn't matter, but it's nice to show you if you want to clean up some areas. So I have those three colors, and now I'm going to put some of the red, which is permanent red, and this is the equivalent to true red in Deco Art. So if you're using paint, you can put light washes, and I'm going to add a little bit of blush, a little redness. That looks really nice, I feel like, on pumpkins. Mostly in the darker areas and in the lower areas, you know, near the seams here. Use your artistic, you know, instinct and kind of put as much as you want. And what this does too, it adds another color that's not in the fox. So even though we've been using like a similar palette for the pumpkins in the fox, this will make the pumpkins stand out a little and be a little bit different from the fox. Okay, and I also want to put a tiny bit of green in there, which sounds weird. Now this is a dark green, Hauser dark green, and I used it mostly for the tendrils, but I like when there's little bits of green on the pumpkin too. So I'm just putting very light whisper strokes, a couple here and there. You can put some down by the red, that'll make a brown, because red and green makes a brown. Just to give it another layer of tone. Okay. And the next thing I want to do, if you can see from the pencils, it's kind of grainy almost. I'm just making sure that it's really nice and sharp. It's grainy from the pencils sitting on top of the tooth of the paper. We didn't press hard, so we didn't press it into the paper. So what I'm going to use is called the Colorless Blender. And this one's by Prismacolor. It does come with the big set. You could buy them separately, which is nice. And it's a pencil without any color in it, and it does exactly what it says. You push it in and it blends your colors. Like you could watch this. It'll make them look more vibrant and more painterly. See, as I'm blending the red in, this is fun to me. This is like a magic stick. I use this all the time when I use pencils. And what you're doing is you're smashing down the tooth of the paper and you're allowing that wax from the pencils to mix together. So you want a couple layers of pencils down before you do this. If you do this after one application or layer of pencils, you're not going to get much results because you won't have enough material down there to blend. You certainly won't get a blend. But see how it blends that green? It softens things. And it really blends these colors nice. And I will show you, now I have a rubber mat that I work on, and what I do a lot of times when I'm going from a dark area to a light with my colorless blender is just scrape it on there, and you can see there's a little bit of the material there, but it cleans off my point. So I don't come into like a light yellow area and contaminate it with the brown or the other color that I'm using. And notice when I start blending, I start in the light area and I drag to the dark. Okay, so look how nice your pumpkins look then. They look all shaded. And then I will take the dark brown pencil, Sepia, which is probably similar to asphaltum. And I'm going to trace around the stems and kind of shade them in. Now I have a good point on my pencil for this. I'm going to show you this is my favorite sharpener. It's one of these 3-hole sharpeners. And I do have one by Faber-Castell, makes these. They're about $5. And this was an off-brand on Amazon, and they're exactly the same. And they're actually my favorite for sharpening my pencils. And I like the top hole for my Prismas. I have several of them, but they give a nice sharp point. And they fit in there well, and they don't break your pencils much. I haven't had any problem. So I'm going to continue on and just kind of outline the stems with the dark brown. Lost my point there. While I'm at it, I'm going to add a little bit of shadow on the underside of the pumpkins. So I'm going to bring that up so you can see. I turned my piece. Just going to add a little shading under them with this color. Again, we're going very light. You don't want to press too hard. And I'm just going to kind of outline see the difference that makes this side to that side. Every layer brings it a little nicer, gives you a little more contrast. That's why it's important to allow the process to happen. I mean, a lot of us, everything goes through ugly stages. And you have to trust the process. And what's nice about the pencils that I'm finding, like I say, it's controllable. It's all easy to do and controllable. If you make a boo-boo, it erases. If you want to do this with paint, you're welcome to try and do it. I'm going to go around the buckle. And see, just doing that really defines that buckle. And I also want to shade the hat band with this color. This is Sepia again, and it's very similar to Asphaltum. Okay? I might want to put a little red in your pumpkin, a little more. It's a thing, you can keep layering a couple layers and really fine-tune everything to how you like. I find that when I make pieces with a lot of contrast, they're my favorites. They really are dynamic and they stand out nice. And the trick with that, I guess, is knowing when to stop and not keep putting too much on there. Whoops, was I out of this? I'm sorry, I was a little bit low. I was just adding some red in here, some red toning. And if you want, you could go over with the colorless blender again if there's areas like here, and just kind of blend everything together if it's looking like it needs another blend. And finally, on the pumpkins, you want to add a couple little curliness coming out. All right, once your pumpkins are done to your liking, look at your fox and see if there's anything you want to fine tune on him. I want to add the whiskers to him. With that, I'm going to be brave and take a black pencil. You could do your whiskers in white first and then black over it if you like, but I'm just going to use the black. And you're going to make sure you have a good point on your pencil and just pull out a few whiskers. Kind of cast them out. Some will get lost. There, he doesn't need too many. And after you do the black, what I do to make like the ones here stand out is just go over them with a little white. And that softens them to gray too, a little bit. You could also add a little more highlight in your eyes if you want. If you add too much, which I did, not too much, but a little too much, you go back over with your black so you can get really fine details with these pencils, which is nice. You can refine your lines on his face. You could add some little black, like guard hairs in here if you want to break up, you know, the white area. You could add some little black hairs in here. If you feel like, say, that line's too predominant, come back with your orange pencil and add some fur. Either one of your colors. You know, just cast it off so you don't have blunt edges on it. And you could fine tune your fox and your shading. You know, you fix any areas that you want to fix up with him. If you want a little more highlight, you could come in with your white. Add some lighter areas. So it's all up to you. This area too, I wanted to mention, there's little bits of orange here that bled over my float line from when I did my fur. So I'm going to clean that up with the white pencil. You can clean it up with paint, of course, but this is easy. And there you have a really nice highlight. You could go over your highlights here. You can go over your highlights on your hat. I really enjoy doing the pencils with the paints because it really makes it easy to adjust things and fine-tune them without much fuss. Okay, and if the last thing I'm going to show you quickly, get my paint again, put my pencils away, and I'm going to put just a little float of ground for him to sit on. And for that I'm using a bigger brush, and I'm just going to take a wash on that brush. So he's not floating in the air. You could use these for cards, you could use them for ornaments if you want to laminate them with resin. I'm going to be having videos how to do UV resin with paper, or you can paint them on any wood surface you have, and it's easy and fun. So here's my original sample, and here's my fox. He came out pretty good, I think. I'm happy with him, and as you see, he's a little different. This guy is a little bigger, I guess, the one we just did. Let me back you off a little. So there you have it. There's our little fox, our Witchy Fox, done in acrylic paints with some colored pencil detailing. This is my original sample, and this is what we just painted today. So I hope you enjoyed the process. Let me know if you like using these pencils as detailing, if you've ever tried that, if you think it's something for you. I kind of really like doing this myself because it makes all these little details so much easier than trying to pick through with a brush. I like to do detail painting, but I know a lot of my followers, you know, sometimes have trouble doing that fine line work and detail, and the pencils to me are like a perfect solution for that. So I'm going to be doing more projects like this. I have a scarecrow coming up in a couple weeks for fall, and I have one more Halloween project that I want to do for sure. But you could see my acrylic playlists. I'll put a link up on at the end here. It's probably up in the corner, and you could see all the acrylic projects that I have. Many of them are going to be having colored pencil accents to them, so I hope you like that. And I have another playlist that has your basic techniques and terms, and I'm going to be building in that category too. So I ask you, if you like things, to like and subscribe my channel and check back often. I'm going to be adding content every week. This is going to be my new outlet for teaching. So I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you'd like me to teach you. I'm happy to hear, and I'm very open to what you'd want to learn. Thank you, and have a good day.